There's no doubt, no one was ever arguing that there shouldn't be an independent investigation into the origins of the virus. And as we see now, there's 62 other nations and states that do support that alongside Australia and the EU. But it's curious, why did Canberra have to take the lead on this?
I think that's the question that I'm asking as well, and as you said, absolutely makes sense to have an independent inquiry, but why Canberra chose to be the one to lead the charge, I guess I'm quietly wishing that the US had done it instead, and then we could have followed suit, and perhaps our own relationship with Beijing wouldn't be as bad as it currently is.
So has it been a foolish thing to do, given the reliance on China now more than ever in the aftermath of Australia's own recovery from the virus?
Well, it speaks to the very difficult balancing act that we're trying to make with China, and obviously the relationship's changed, I think, clearly for the worse in recent years. You know, the COVID inquiry call comes on the back of a number of things that we've frustrated Beijing by doing. I think it really dates back to the Huawei decision, and, you know, again, there are complex reasons why we might have chosen to push back on Huawei coming and serving us in the domestic market. But the fact that we did that first, that we communicated with the US that we were going to do it, that we also then travelled through Europe convincing our allies to do it as well. You know, there's a long history here of us now frustrating the Chinese, and what we're experiencing, as superpowers want to do, is that when you frustrate them for long enough, they find ways to punish you. And so you either have to prepare for that punishment or perhaps choose to pick your battles a little bit more carefully.
Will President Xi Jinping be more vulnerable now than before the pandemic?
Another big question. I mean, I think if you read the Western press, you know, looking from the outside in, and we have a thought that Xi might be more vulnerable because there's been so much criticism directed his way at how China's handled the early stages of the pandemic. But if you look at it internally, and I think from the view of a number of developing countries as well, what they see is that China's done an exceptional job of getting the virus under control and also of rebooting the economy, and certainly that they've done a better job than the United States, for example. And so I think there's a conflict there. There's vulnerabilities looking from the outside, but internally, I think Xi Jinping still has supreme confidence in himself and the party to lead China through the period. And he also has all sorts of tools at his hand to convince the population domestically that he's in charge.
And of course, helping the political system's case would be a strong economy. We are headed to the National People's Congress. Is there any benefit in setting at this point a GDP growth target? I mean, it seems a risky proposition whether you set it too high or too low.
I think it'd be a very good time for the party to let go of the targets that they've had in the past, and they have shifted, you know, from about 10 years ago they've started talking more about targets in a range rather than a specific goal. I think at the start of this year they were targeting a 5.6% growth rate, and they'll almost certainly bring that down, but they'd be better off to let go of it altogether and target for something, I still think, higher than one of the best case scenarios, say, coming out of the IMF is, I think, a 2.3 or 2.6% growth rate. They're going to be wanting to get it higher than that, and I think they've got a number of ways that they can go about trying to achieve that. None of it guaranteed, but I still do think China is going to find a way to grow faster than just about any other economy in the world, and that brings us back to the challenges that we face in pushing back continually against them, and also wanting for a large number of commentators to reduce that dependence on them. You know, if they grow the fastest of any economy out there, then they're our best chance for coming out of this pandemic for our economy as well.
Is that relentless growth going to, again, come at the expense of structural reform? I mean, you can say that the window's closed, right? Do we see, particularly after the MPC, that it's just resorting to the old playbook again of stoking growth?
Well, structural reform's definitely on the table, and, you know, they talk about it all the time and then don't make huge progress. But you can give one example of state-owned enterprise reform. I mean, we know that if they chose to privatise or to inject more capital, there are different ways that they can try and stimulate state-owned enterprise growth. But privatising might be one way where they could make some gains there and boost the economy that way. It's not the playbook that they normally turn to, but then, desperate times call for desperate measures. So you might actually see them turning to structural reform for exactly that reason as another source of potential growth in the years ahead.